He thought the man on the porch was nobody. A large black man in faded sweatpants on a Saturday morning, standing at the railing of an expensive colonial in the most prestigious neighborhood in Whitfield County, holding a coffee mug like he owned the place, and in Officer Dale Mercer's world, that combination only computed one way. He didn't introduce himself when he got out of the cruiser. He didn't ask a question. He just walked up the path and gave an order. What Mercer didn't know, what 17 years of unchecked certainty had made him constitutionally incapable of considering, was that the man who calmly refused to move was the person who decided which organized crime cases the Federal Bureau of Investigation pursued across 6 southeastern states. And that 9 weeks before this Saturday morning, that same man had read Mercer's name in a federal liaison report and written it into a mental ledger under the heading of situations that needed watching. Mercer thought he was removing a trespasser. He was completing someone else's case file. Stay with this story, because the moment that wallet hit the booking desk, everything Dale Mercer had spent 17 years building was finished, and the only question left was how completely it was going to burn. The coffee was perfect. That was the first conscious thought Marcus Webb had when he stepped through the front door of 318 Elmwood Circle on that October Saturday. Not about the house, not about the neighborhood, not about the 26 years it had taken him to get to a morning like this one. The coffee was perfect, and the air was crisp, and for the first time in longer than he could honestly account for, Marcus Webb had nowhere he was required to be. He was wearing navy sweatpants that had been washed enough times that the drawstring had frayed at both ends. His Howard University t-shirt had faded to a pale gray. At the shoulders, the university seal cracked and barely legible. On his feet were worn leather slides that his son Darius had been threatening to confiscate for the better part of 2 years. He looked by every available external measure like a man on a quiet Saturday morning who had earned the right to look like nothing in particular. He was 51 years old. His hair was close-cropped and silver at the temples, the silver spreading inward in the way that hair does on men who have spent decades carrying weight that has to go somewhere even when it doesn't show. On the face, his posture was commanding in the specific way that certain kinds of work build into a body over time, not military exactly, though close to it. The posture of a man who had spent the better part of 3 decades walking into rooms where the balance of power was unstable and needed to be read instantly and accurately, and who had never once walked out of one of those rooms having misread it. The porch at 318 Elmwood Circle was wide and deep, framed in white-painted wood with a mahogany railing that ran the full length of the front face of the house. The wicker furniture was still in a flat-pack box somewhere inside the maze of cardboard that currently constituted the interior of his new home. Marcus leaned against the railing instead, both hands wrapped around his mug, and looked out at the street. Elmwood Circle was the kind of street that had decided at some point in its architectural history to take itself seriously. The homes were large colonials and modified Tudors set back on deep lots, with mature oaks and maples beginning their October turn at the edges of the leaves going amber and rust in the early light. The driveways were paved. The lawns were edged with the precision of people who either cared very much or paid someone who did. A stone planter at the end of his driveway was empty. He had a vague thought about putting something in it before the first frost. Cedar Brook Heights was the most sought-after residential enclave in Whitfield County, Georgia. People moved here for the school district, for the property values, for the particular kind of quiet that money purchases in American suburbs, a quiet that is less about the absence of sound and more about the presence of distance from everything that crowds in on ordinary life in ordinary places. Marcus had purchased the property 14 weeks earlier. The closing had taken place on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had sat at the title company's conference table in a navy suit and signed his name 41 times across various documents. While the title agent, a pleasant woman in her 40s who had clearly not expected him, kept offering him water and asking if he needed more time to review anything. He had not needed more time. He was, among other things, thorough. The house was the culmination of 26 years. Not of saving alone, though there had been saving, but of working, of an entire adult life inside one of the most demanding institutions in the country. Marcus Webb was the special agent in charge of the FBI's Organized Crime Division Region 6. He had held that title for 4 years. Before it, he had spent 22 years as a field agent, working upward from general criminal investigations through violent crimes and into undercover operations that had required him to disappear for months at a time under identities that were not his own. He had been shot twice. Once in the left thigh during a takedown in Atlanta that went sideways at the last possible second. Once in the right shoulder during a warehouse breach in Savannah that he still occasionally revisited in the specific way the body catalogs the moments it nearly stopped. He had received the Director's Award for Excellence 3 times. He had dismantled 3 major trafficking networks across the Southeast. He had testified before a Senate subcommittee on organized crime. He had also been married for 11 years to a woman named Carol, who had been brilliant and patient, and eventually quietly finished. The divorce had been civil in the way that endings are civil, when both people are tired and neither one is wrong, and the institution that comes between them is simply too large and too consuming to leave room for anything else. Their son Darius had been 9. He was 24 now, finishing a master's degree in architecture at Georgia Tech, planning to come help with boxes this afternoon. The house was what the sacrifice had been pointing toward. It was the proof of something Marcus had never quite been able to articulate, but had always believed that the work meant something, that it went somewhere. He took a long sip of coffee and breathed. The moving boxes were still stacked inside. The kitchen was half organized. The spare bedroom had 3 boxes labeled MISC that he genuinely could not account for. But the porch was clean and solid, and the October air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves and distant pine, and someone 3 or 4 houses away was mowing with a machine that ran quietly and cleanly. He was completely, genuinely at peace. That peace had approximately 4 minutes left. Patricia Holden had been awake since 5:30. This was not unusual. Patricia was constitutionally unable to sleep past 6 on any morning, a habit formed across nearly 2 decades of early HOA board calls and neighborhood watch email chains that began with great urgency at dawn. She was 58, maintained her blonde hair with the regularity of someone who considered it a professional investment, and wore the HOA board president's lanyard, a laminated card on a green nylon strap bearing the Cedar Brook Heights seal, even on Saturday mornings, because she felt it communicated something important about the nature of her commitment. She had lived at 321 Elmwood Circle for 14 years and served as HOA board president for 9 of them. In that time, she had filed 37 formal complaints with the township about landscaping violations, noise ordinances, unauthorized modifications, and what she described in her filings and aesthetic inconsistencies that threatened property values. She had a 3-ring binder color-tabbed that documented every complaint and its resolution status. She had not in 14 years examined what the binder said about her. She had watched the moving truck arrive at 318 3 days ago through her plantation shutters, but had not been able to see the new owners clearly. Moving day had come and gone without satisfying her curiosity. She had been patient. She was good at patience when it served a purpose. Now on this Saturday morning, standing at her front window with her second cup of coffee and the shutters tilted precisely enough to see without being seen, she had her look. The man on the porch at 318 was large, broad-shouldered, black. He was wearing what Patricia's mind registered as sloppy clothes, sweatpants, a faded t-shirt, old slides. He was standing at the porch railing, holding a coffee mug and looking out at the street with the relaxed, unhurried posture of someone who had every right to be exactly where he was. Patricia did not process this last part. What she processed was large black man casual clothes, unfamiliar, standing on the porch of a house she believed had been recently vacated. She had not in 3 days walked across the street to introduce herself. She had not knocked on the door. She had not looked up the public property records or checked the township's new resident notification emails, which she received automatically as HOA president. She had not noted the moving boxes visible through the large front window boxes that were the most direct available evidence that the house was not vacant and that the man on the porch was unpacking it. She had not done any of these things because the conclusion she reached in the first 4 seconds of looking required none of them. In Patricia Holden's narrowly constructed internal map of Cedar Brook Heights, a large black man in casual clothes on the porch of an expensive colonial at 7:15 a Saturday morning was not a homeowner having coffee. It was a problem requiring resolution. She did not examine this conclusion. She did not ask herself why it was her first and only reading of a completely innocuous scene. She simply moved to the phone. She told herself she was performing civic duty. She told herself this was exactly what the neighborhood watch existed for. She picked up her phone and dialed Whitfield County Dispatch. The dispatcher who answered was working the Saturday morning shift and had developed over years in the role a finely calibrated ability to distinguish between genuine emergencies and the particular category of call that came in from certain neighborhoods about certain kinds of people. She logged them all. That was her job. But she heard the difference. Patricia's voice was pitched into manufactured urgency, the breathless lowered tone of a woman performing alarm rather than experiencing it. She gave her name and address. She described the situation at 318 Elmwood Circle in terms that escalated with each sentence. Suspicious man becoming large African-American male in sloppy clothing, becoming just standing there, looking around like he's scoping the place out, the final phrase delivered with the emphasis of someone ensuring the recipient understood the gravity. She told the dispatcher the house had just sold and the owners are not home yet. Both statements were presented as facts. Neither was verified. The house had in fact sold to Marcus Webb, and the owner was in fact home standing on his own front porch drinking coffee. Patricia either did not know this or had chosen a version of events in which it did not matter. The dispatcher asked for a physical description. Patricia gave it. She described Marcus's clothing in detail. She described his size. She used the phrase, "He clearly does not belong here," with the confidence of a woman who had decided across many years that certain kinds of belonging were hers to determine. The dispatcher logged the call and dispatched the nearest available unit. Patricia ended the call and stood at the window. The man across the street had set his mug on the porch railing and was running his thumb along the door trim, inspecting it with the focused attention of someone making a mental list of things the previous owners had let go. He looked to any objective observer exactly like a new homeowner, cataloging what needed fixing. Patricia did not see this. She watched the street for the cruiser. Marcus, completely unaware that his Saturday morning had just been criminalized 40 feet away, finished his inspection of the trim and took a last sip of coffee. Then from 3 blocks away came the low-distant sound of a siren, not wailing, just the single perfunctory whoop of a cruiser signaling its intent before turning onto a residential street. Marcus did not consciously register it at first, but his body did. 26 years had built a nervous system with its own intelligence, one that processed threat signals before the cognitive mind caught up. His shoulders moved barely a small settling, and his eyes shifted toward the sound. He stood up straighter. His hands remained loose around the mug. He waited. The cruiser that turned onto Elmwood Circle was driven by Officer Dale Mercer. Mercer was 44 years old and stocky, in the way that men go stocky when the physical discipline of early career is replaced by the physical confidence of mid-career authority, the gym replaced by the certainty that the badge does the work the body used to. His uniform was pressed. His face was broad and usually flushed, and he had a haircut that suggested the barber and not much else had changed about him in 15 years. 17 years on this Whitfield County force. In those 17 years, he had filed more suspicious person reports in Cedar Brook Heights than any other officer in the district, a fact that appeared in no single document, but that could be assembled from the dispatch logs by anyone willing to look. He had also accumulated 11 citizen complaints. They were detailed and consistent in their pattern stops, without cause, aggressive language demands for identification that had no legal basis, physical force applied to people who were not resisting. 8 of the 11 complaints had come from black residents. All 11 had been administratively dismissed under the previous department chief as unsubstantiated. Mercer knew the complaints were there. He knew they had been dismissed. He had drawn the same conclusion from this that men in his position often drew, that the system had reviewed his conduct and found it acceptable. that the complaints themselves were the problem, not the behavior. What Mercer did not know, what he could not have known, was that 9 weeks before this Saturday morning, his name had appeared in a federal civil rights enforcement liaison report generated by Marcus's own division. The report documented officers across Whitfield County with patterns of racially disparate stop-and-frisk activity. Mercer's name was there, badge number 4031. Marcus had read that report at his desk in the Region 6 field office, noted the name, and filed it in the mental ledger he kept of situations that needed watching. He had not yet opened a formal file. He had not yet had cause. 9 weeks later, Cause was walking up the driveway. Sitting in the passenger seat was Officer Caleb Pruitt, 26, 6 months, Shas Ishin, out of the academy. Pruitt was earnest. He had wanted to be a police officer since he was 12 years old. He believed without irony that the job was about protection. He had noticed in 6 months with Mercer certain patterns he didn't know what to do with, and had dealt with his discomfort the way young officers often do, by deferring, by telling himself he'd understand better when he had more experience. Mercer slowed the cruiser as he turned onto Elmwood Circle, his eyes moving immediately to 318. He clocked Marcus on the porch in under 2 seconds. The dispatch description matched what he saw, and his brain, moving with the speed of a conclusion already reached, assembled it into confirmation. He did not consider whether the man might live there. He pulled to a hard stop against the curb at an angle that blocked the driveway. He got out without waiting for Pruitt and slammed the door with unnecessary force. Marcus heard it from the porch. He had been watching since the cruiser turned the corner. He tracked Mercer's approach with the patient, systematic attention of a man for whom reading the body was a survival competency. What he saw was a man who had already decided what this was. The heavy-footed strut, the hand on the holster, the total absence of any polite professional body language. This man was not here to ask questions. He was here to establish dominance. Marcus did not move from the railing. Mercer bypassed the driveway, entirely cutting across the edge of the lawn to the paved walkway, and came to a stop at the foot of the porch steps. He looked up at Marcus. Marcus looked down at him. There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds in which a different kind of officer might have introduced himself, might have said good morning, might have explained that a call had come in and they were just checking, might have read the scene, the coffee mug, the door trim, inspection, the moving boxes through the front window, and adjusted his approach accordingly. Mercer did not introduce himself. "Step down off the porch," he said. No greeting, no explanation, no legal basis stated. Just the command delivered in the clipped, aggressive tone he used when he wanted to immediately establish who held the authority. Marcus took a slow breath. He set his coffee mug on the railing. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, deep. "You heard me." Mercer moved his right foot to the first porch step. "Step down here, right now." "Is there something I can help you with?" Officer Marcus said. He had not stepped down. He had not put his hands up. He simply stood at the railing and looked at Mercer with the alert, assessing steadiness of a man who was processing everything he saw. Pruitt had come around the front of the cruiser and positioned himself at the base of the walkway a few feet behind Mercer. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot. "We received a call about a suspicious individual on this property," Mercer said. "I'm not going to ask you again. Step down and produce some identification." Marcus let the words land. He registered suspicious individual, the generality of it, the way it referenced his presence, without specifying any behavior, because there was no behavior to specify. He registered the total absence of any stated legal basis. Suspicious individual. Marcus said, allowing a faint dry note into his voice, not mockery, but the sound of a man who has heard this framing before and knows exactly what it means. "I'm drinking coffee on a Saturday morning." "You don't live here," Mercer stated. Not a question, a pronouncement. "Is that what dispatch told you?" Mercer's neck flushed. The flush moved upward visibly from the collar. "This property just sold. The owners are not home." "Is that what you believe?" Marcus said. "I need your ID," Mercer said, taking another step up. He was on the second stair now, invading the distance that professional training dictated should be maintained. "And I need you to explain what you're doing on this property before I put you in cuffs for trespassing." Pruitt cleared his throat from the walkway. "Hey, Trent, I got it. Pruitt, Mercer said without turning. Marcus looked at the rookie. He saw a young man who knew something was wrong and didn't have the scaffolding to act on it. He saw the shape of how departments like this one reproduced themselves not through malice alone, but through the compliance of men who were uncomfortable and said nothing. Then Marcus looked back at Mercer and said the thing that would seal the interaction's outcome regardless of what came next. Men who work for what they have don't need to drive around in it at 7 in the morning to prove anything. Mercer said, his voice dropping into something slower and more contemptuous, looking Marcus up and down with the settled, comfortable certainty of a man delivering a philosophy rather than an insult. "You want to tell me what you're proving, standing on that porch?" The words landed in the October air between them and hung there. It was not hot anger. It was not the reactive ugliness of a man caught off guard. It was the casual, unhurried contempt of someone who had been saying things like this for 17 years and had never once been required to account for them. That was what made it worse than anger. Anger implied the possibility of reconsideration. This was a worldview. Marcus felt the cold knot of it in his chest and kept his face completely still. "Officer," Marcus said. His voice had shifted, not louder, but denser. The kind of register that carries authority the way certain materials carry weight. "I am under no legal obligation to provide you with identification. You have no reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit any crime. Furthermore, you are standing on private property without a warrant, without consent, and without probable cause. Terry versus Ohio does not apply to a man standing on his own porch." The effect was immediate and visible. Mercer's foot came off the second step. The flush in his neck deepened, not the flush of a man reconsidering, but the flush of a man whose ego had just been struck by something it was not equipped to deflect. Mercer was not accustomed to being quoted the law by the people he stopped. In 17 years, he had developed immunity to constitutional protest, the invocation of rights by people who were frightened and knew the words but would ultimately comply because compliance was what people did when they were facing someone with a badge and the institutional weight of the department behind them. What he was not prepared for was a man who cited the specific controlling case with the relaxed precision of someone who had not looked it up this morning and was not remotely frightened. For one genuine flickering second, doubt moved through Mercer's face. And then his ego, enormous, load-bearing, and fragile in the way that load-bearing things become fragile when they are the only thing holding the structure together, overrode it. He could not back down. Not in front of Pruitt. Not in front of this man. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer," Mercer sneered. His hand moved to his holster and unsnapped the retention strap. The sound was small, a soft mechanical click. In the quiet of the suburban morning, it carried across the entire porch. Marcus heard it. His body registered it with the calm, comprehensive alertness of a man who had been in rooms where that sound preceded catastrophe. He did not move. He did not flinch. He simply noted it the way a navigator notes a course deviation, precisely, without panic, and with the full understanding of what it signaled. Pruitt, at the base of the walkway, had gone very still. "Last warning," Mercer said. "ID now, or you're going face down on this wood." Pruitt found his voice. "Hey," the rookie said, his voice cracking slightly. Just give him your ID. It'll make this easier." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely trying to find a way out of what he could feel was going wrong. Marcus looked at Pruitt for a long moment, saw the discomfort, saw the silence that would follow it. Then he looked back at Mercer. The badge wallet was in the right side pocket of his sweatpants. He could feel the slight weight of it, the slim leather case containing the gold shield and the federal identification card that would, if produced, end this interaction in 4 seconds. Mercer would read the words. The blood would leave his face. He would stammer and retreat and write in his report that it had been a misunderstanding, and then he would go back out on patrol. The next black man in a nice neighborhood who told him no, who cited the law back at him, who refused to perform the expected deference, would not have a gold shield, would not have the institutional protection of the FBI, would be alone on a porch with a man who had just been reinforced again in the belief that his behaviors carried no consequences. Marcus had spent 2 decades building cases. He understood the difference between stopping a problem and solving it. He understood that the only prosecutions that held were the ones where the evidence was complete, where every step of the violation was documented, where there was no procedural gap through which a defense could slide. But there was something else, something Mercer would not know until months later, when the federal investigation had assembled itself into a complete picture, and a federal prosecutor named Catherine Voss sat across from Marcus in a review meeting and showed him the timeline. 9 weeks before this Saturday morning, Marcus had read Mercer's name in a liaison report at his desk in the Region 6 office. The report flagged officers in Whitfield County with documented patterns of racially disparate enforcement. Mercer was on the list. Marcus had noted it, filed it, kept it in the mental ledger of situations that needed watching, and had not yet provided enough cause to open a formal file. Standing on his own porch, feeling Mercer's deliberate arrogance land in the air between them, Marcus understood that cause had just arrived. Mercer needed to commit. He needed to complete the violation on camera, with a witness with a clear chain of events and no ambiguity about what drove each decision. He needed to hang himself on his own record. This decision cost Marcus something he did not show on his face. He knew with the cold, complete knowledge of a man who had studied these interactions from both sides across a career what the next 60 seconds were going to feel like. He knew the cold of the steel. He knew the particular indignity of being walked across his own lawn in handcuffs. He absorbed this knowledge without flinching the way he had absorbed many things across many years. Pruitt's body camera was rolling. He had confirmed this visually before Mercer reached the porch. Mercer's dashcam was recording. The red indicator light was visible through the cruiser windshield. Every word spoken on this porch was already evidence. "I am not giving you my ID," Marcus said. His voice was steady and final, the voice of a man who has made a decision and will not revisit it. "And if you intend to arrest me, you had better be absolutely certain you understand the laws you're about to violate." Mercer's eyes narrowed to slits of pure fury. "Hands behind your back," he growled. And he lunged. Mercer moved with the heavy, uncoordinated aggression of a man driven entirely by adrenaline and wounded pride. His hand shot out for Marcus's left wrist, and Marcus felt the grip land thick fingers, excessive force, the kind of contact that was not about securing a suspect, but about punishing one for defiance. Marcus went limp. It was a trained response practiced across years of tactical work and refined by the specific understanding that physical resistance here was not a card he could afford to play. Not because he couldn't defend himself, he knew 5 ways to break the grip of a man Mercer's size without leaving a mark on himself, but because physical resistance would immediately reframe everything. It would give Mercer's report the language it needed. It would take a clear civil rights violation and obscure it under the narrative of a physical altercation. He went completely limp and let Mercer have the arrest. "I am not resisting," Marcus said, clearly loudly projecting toward Pruitt's body camera and the dash cam in the cruiser. "I am complying under duress. This is an unlawful arrest." "Shut your mouth," Mercer spat. He wrenched Marcus's right arm behind his back with more force than the situation required. Marcus felt the pull in his left shoulder socket, a sharp and unpleasant strain that would ache for 3 days. Mercer kicked Marcus's feet apart with the heavy toe of his boot and pressed his full body weight into Marcus's back, pinning him against the mahogany railing. The railing held. The coffee mug did not. Mercer's motion caught the railing with his forearm, and the mug, the first coffee Marcus had made in his new home on his first real morning in it, went over the edge and shattered on the porch boards below. The sound was small and sharp and contained within it somehow everything about the morning that needed no further explanation. The first act of this house, the first ordinary thing Marcus had brought to this porch, broken by a man who had decided he didn't belong here before he'd gotten out of his car. The handcuffs were Smith & Wesson, Model 100s. Marcus knew the model by feel. They closed around his wrists with the metallic ratchet sound that was in his professional experience, a sound that meant entirely different things depending on which side of it you were on. Mercer applied them a deliberate notch tighter than necessary. Marcus felt the immediate localized bite of the metal against the bones of his wrists, felt the circulation begin to restrict. He did not make a sound. Across the street behind the plantation shutters at 321, Patricia Holden watched the arrest with the expression of a woman experiencing the satisfaction of being proven right. The man had been removed. The officers had handled it. The neighborhood was protected. This satisfaction lasted 4 seconds before something shifted behind her eyes. The man in the sweatpants was not struggling. He was not shouting. He was being pressed against the railing of what was apparently a very expensive house, and he looked through the narrow slit in her shutters from across the street like a king being momentarily inconvenienced by people who had badly miscalculated his rank. Patricia let the shutters snap shut. The certainty was still there, but something underneath it had begun very quietly to crack. Mercer marched Marcus down his own front steps, across the paved walkway, past the empty stone planter he'd been thinking about filling before the first frost, and toward the cruiser. The handcuff chain bit with each step. Marcus walked with his back straight and his shoulders level, which was not easy with his arms wrenched behind him, but he was not going to give Mercer the additional satisfaction of watching him hunch. Mercer opened the rear door and pressed his hand on the top of Marcus's head as he guided him in the standard ducking maneuver applied with more force than standard. The hard plastic seat received him without ceremony. The door slammed. The sound sealed him into a space that smelled of industrial disinfectant and something older underneath the smell of institutional spaces that had processed too many people under too much stress for too long. Through the plexiglass divider, he could see Mercer and Pruitt climbing into the front seats. Mercer was already talking before his door fully closed. "Fired up this morning," Mercer said to Pruitt with the tone of a man who has won something and wants to be acknowledged for it. He slapped the steering wheel. Thought he was a tough guy. Thought he knew the law. "Let's see how much he likes the holding cell." Pruitt said nothing. He looked into the rearview mirror, and his eyes found Marcus's for a moment before sliding away. "He said he owned the place," Pruitt said quietly. "Give me a break, Bryce." Mercer threw the cruiser into drive and pulled from the curb with a screech of tires. He spoke as if Marcus was not separated from him by 3 inches of plexiglass through which every word carried clearly. "Men like that don't live in Cedar Brook Heights." He was casing the property, waiting for the moving crew to clear out so he could strip whatever they left behind. "I've seen it 100 times. Pruitt did not respond. He looked into the rearview mirror again, and when his eyes found Marcus's, this time, he did not look away quite as quickly. Marcus sat in the back and worked. In his mind, he was building the log officer Dale Mercer badge, number 4031, Whitfield County, P.D. He had read the badge clearly before Mercer reached the porch steps. Officer Caleb Pruitt, badge number 819, read when Pruitt came around the front of the cruiser. Cruiser designation, Atom 7, visible on the side panel. Time of initial contact, approximately 7:22 a.m. Time of unlawful physical contact, approximately 7:25. The tightness around his wrists was persistent. He could feel the bruising forming in the soft tissue, the deep spreading ache that would still be visible 3 days from now. He noted it without anger, as data, as evidence, as something that would eventually be photographed and documented in a file that already had Mercer's name in it. A quiet, humorless, near smile touched the corners of Marcus's mouth. Mercer thought he was transporting a nobody to a holding cell. He thought he was teaching a lesson about respect and authority, and who owned the streets of Cedar Brook Heights. The ride to the Whitfield County precinct was 9 minutes. The fallout from this arrest was going to last Dale Mercer the rest of his life. The Whitfield County Police Department's main precinct was a squat 2-story brick building on Route 7 that had been built in the early 90s and renovated in ways that made it look more renovated than functional. The fluorescent lighting in the booking area was the kind that never fully convinced anyone it was sufficient. The linoleum was worn through to the concrete in 2 spots near the booking desk. The percolator in the break room had been producing what the overnight shift sometimes called accusations. On this particular Saturday morning, the building was thinly staffed. The overnight drunks had been processed and released by 7. The day shift was mostly out on patrol. Desk Sergeant Roy Denton, 52, was working through a stack of arrest reports from the previous week with the focused misery of a man doing a job he no longer found interesting, but had performed too long to leave. He had a graying mustache and the kind of tired eyes that accumulate not from lack of sleep, but from years of witnessing human behavior in its least flattering expressions. He was in the general estimation of the department a decent man, not exceptional, not especially principled, but decent. in the way that a person can be decent and still be part of a machine that produces indecent outcomes through the simple mechanism of never examining its own patterns. He looked up from his paperwork as Mercer hauled Marcus through the back entrance. Marcus walked in with his back straight and his chin level. In Denton's experience, people who were genuinely guilty of something almost never entered a booking room that way. Genuine guilt produced a specific range of physicality, hunching, avoiding performing either contrition or belligerence. What Denton was seeing was neither. It was the contained alert stillness of a man cataloging his surroundings. "Morning, Smitty," Mercer said, using Denton's precinct nickname with the easy familiarity of a man who considered himself on good terms with everyone. He steered Marcus toward the metal bench bolted to the wall and pressed him down onto it. "Got a live one. Trespassing, failure to identify, resisting. The whole package." Denton picked up his pen. Resisting. He looked at Marcus. Marcus did not look like a man who had resisted anything. "Really, Trent. He was giving me lip." Mercer said, his tone shifting immediately into the defensive register. Denton recognized as the tone of a man whose story was going to need finessing on paper. "Refused lawful orders. I had to take him down to get the cuffs on." From the bench, Marcus spoke. His voice was calm and conversational, carrying the kind of weight that did not require volume. "For the record, Sergeant, none of that account is accurate. There is dashcam and body camera footage that will confirm I was standing on the porch of my own home when Officer Mercer arrived and issued his first unlawful command." Mercer wheeled around and pointed. "You speak when spoken to. You understand me." Denton did not redirect his eyes to Mercer. He was looking at Marcus. Something was profoundly wrong with the picture. The man's vocabulary was not the vocabulary of petty criminality. His demeanor was not the demeanor of a man who had just been physically taken down. He was too still, too focused, too much like someone who was doing something other than enduring what was happening to him. "Name," Denton said, directing the question at Marcus. "He wouldn't give it." Mercer cut in. He reached into his cargo pocket and produced Marcus's badge wallet, still closed, still unexamined, and tossed it onto the booking counter. It landed with a thud that was heavier than a standard billfold's thud. "Here, find out who this clown is. Process him, Smitty." Mercer turned toward the break room. "Get his prints. I want to know if he's got warrants." Denton picked up the wallet. The wallet was heavier than it should have been. Denton registered this through his fingers. Before he opened it, a slight but definite additional mass, suggesting something denser than cards and cash. He flipped it open at the natural fold, expecting a driver's license behind a clear plastic window. What he found instead was a custom interior. The bottom half of the fold contained a shield. Solid gold, not plated, not tinted, but solid and substantial and intricately detailed with the weight and texture of something manufactured to carry the authority of an institution that had been operating for over a century and knew the difference between an emblem and a prop. The FBI eagle spread its wings across the full width of the shield, its detail precise down to the individual feathers. Around the central seal, in heavy raised blue enamel letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation. On the top half of the fold was a laminated identification card. High-security issue Denton could see the layered authentication features even without a UV light. There was a photograph, a clear recent photograph of the man currently handcuffed to his booking bench in faded sweatpants and a Howard University t-shirt. Next to the photograph, in bold federal typography, Marcus A. Webb. Below, Special Agent in Charge. Below that, Organized Crime Division Region 6. The wallet stopped moving against the counter because Denton's hand had stopped moving. Everything in Roy Denton that was capable of going still went still. The blood he could feel. It actually feel it, the way you can feel certain kinds of dread moving through the body, evacuated his face from the top down. He stared at the gold shield. He stared at it for what was probably 4 seconds and felt like a substantial portion of a minute. Then slowly, with the mechanical deliberateness of a man whose body was continuing to function, while his brain underwent a catastrophic recalculation, he lifted his eyes. The man on the booking bench was looking at him. Marcus had been watching the moment of recognition approach from the instant the wallet left Mercer's hand. He had watched Denton pick it up, watched the slight change in his grip as the weight registered, watched the opening of the fold, watched the color leave Denton's face in the efficient, dramatic fashion of a man who had just understood something that could not be taken back. Their eyes met across the booking room. Marcus gave a single slow, deliberate nod. Nothing more. No triumph. No visible satisfaction. No edge. Just the nod, a simple confirmation that yes, Denton was seeing what he thought he was seeing, and yes, it meant exactly what he thought it meant. Denton's voice came out without his full authorization. "T. Trent," he said. Barely audible. Mercer was at the break room coffee station, stirring powdered creamer into a paper cup when Denton called his name. He heard it distantly, too occupied managing the arrest narrative in his mind, already finding the language for the report. "Yeah," he called back. "What's the name? John Doe." "Got a rap sheet, Trent." Denton's voice had a quality in it, a cracking, involuntary quality that made Mercer's hand slow. "Get back over here, right now." Mercer frowned. He put the cup down and came back through the doorway. Denton's face was the color of old concrete. His hand, still resting on the counter, was vibrating faintly. "What is the matter with you?" Mercer said. "You look like you saw a ghost." Denton did not answer. He turned the open wallet around on the counter and slid it across so it was facing Mercer. Mercer looked down. Time changed its texture. It became thick and resistant, moving through Mercer's perception the way water moves when you are trying to run through it. His eyes tracked left to right across the surface of the gold shield. The eagle. The enamel letters. Federal Bureau of Investigation. His gaze moved to the credential card. The photograph. The face of the man he had just 11 minutes ago pressed against a porch railing and handcuffed over an objection he had dismissed as a performance. Special Agent in Charge, Organized Crime Division, Region 6. The reality entered Mercer's consciousness the way large catastrophic information often does, not all at once, but in sequential waves, each larger than the last. First, the disbelief. This must be wrong. This must be fake. People don't actually. Then the recognition that he had felt the weight of this wallet and it was real, that the credential had security features visible from where he was standing, that the face in the photograph was the face of the man on the bench. His knees buckled. It was visible. Both knees dropped an inch before he caught himself against the edge of the counter, and the sound his palm made, slapping the wood, was the sound of a man grabbing the last solid thing available. The arrogant flush that had been sitting in his cheeks since he put the handcuffs on evacuated his face in an instant. What replaced it was the specific gray-white of genuine mortal terror. He had just assaulted a special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation on the man's own property. He had handcuffed him. He had applied the cuffs too tight deliberately. He had pressed the man against a porch railing. He had transported him in the back of a cruiser while making dismissive, racially contemptuous comments about him within clear hearing range. He had presented him to a booking sergeant as a trespasser. "Oh," Mercer whispered. The word slipped out without his permission. "Oh my God." He backed away from the counter, away from the wallet, away from the gold shield sitting on the booking desk like an accusation in physical form. His eyes darted to Marcus, to the man in sweatpants on the booking bench, with his hands still cuffed behind his back, and a look of absolute controlled patience on his face, and the distance between where Trent Mercer had believed he was standing 20 minutes ago, and where he was actually standing collapsed into him, with a finality that felt like impact. The door from the side entrance opened, and Pruitt walked in, carrying of all things Marcus's coffee mug from the porch. He had apparently retrieved it before the arrest. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at Denton's face, at Mercer's face, at the wallet on the counter, at Marcus on the bench. What Pruitt said quietly. "What is it?" Nobody answered. The fluorescent lights hummed. Mercer breathed in the short, ragged intervals of a man in the early stages of understanding his own destruction. The booking room was so quiet that the sound of the handcuff chain shifting when Marcus adjusted his weight on the bench carried across the entire space like a signal. Marcus stood up from the bench. The transformation was not theatrical. It was simply the natural consequence of a man who had been patient, releasing his patience and being again fully himself. In his faded Howard University sweatpants and worn leather slides, with his wrists still behind his back and the bruise marks from the cuffs deepening by the minute, Marcus Webb suddenly occupied the entire room. Not through size, though he was a large man. Through presence, the specific gravitational quality of someone for whom rooms have a habit of reorienting themselves. He looked at Denton. "Sergeant." His voice had dropped to a register that was not loud and did not need to be. It was the voice of command, not performed command, not the overcompensating authority of a man who needs to prove something, but the genuine article. The voice of a man who had given orders in situations where lives depended on whether they were followed. "Come around this desk. Remove these handcuffs. Officer Mercer is not to come within 10 feet of me. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." The words came out of Denton before he had consciously chosen to say them. He was already moving, pushing back from the desk, reaching for the keyring on his belt. His hands were shaking badly enough that the keys clicked against each other with every step. "Yes, Agent Webb, right away, sir." He came around the booking counter and approached Marcus, and the process of finding the right key and seating it into the cuff mechanism took him 3 agonizing attempts, 3 long attempts in which the only sound in the room was the clicking of metal against metal and the controlled breathing of the man whose wrists he was trying to free. On the 3rd attempt, the mechanism released. The handcuffs fell away. Marcus brought his arms forward. The red grooves pressed into his wrists by the over-tightened cuffs were already deepening into purple-black. He looked at them for a moment, one measured, deliberate moment, then looked at Mercer. Mercer was still backed against the far wall. He looked like a man who had discovered the ground beneath him was not solid. Marcus crossed the room and retrieved his wallet from the counter. He pocketed it with the slow finality of someone closing a chapter. Then he turned his full attention to the man who had handcuffed him. "Officer Mercer." The temperature in his voice had dropped to something close to absolute zero. Not the hot rage of personal insult, but the cold, precise fury of a federal official detailing a criminal violation. "You stopped me without cause. You demanded identification without legal basis. You unsnapped your holster as a physical threat. You applied force to secure an unlawful arrest. You applied the handcuffs deliberately beyond the safe threshold to cause pain. You transported me in a cruiser while making racially contemptuous statements about me within my hearing. You did all of this because your ego could not accommodate a black man in this neighborhood telling you no. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a federal crime, and you committed it in front of 2 cameras. Mercer's mouth opened. "Agent Webb, listen. This was a misunderstanding." The call came in, and the dispatcher said, "Do not," Marcus said. One phrase delivered with the quiet certainty of a closed door. Mercer stopped mid-sentence. The heavy wooden door at the back of the room swung open. Captain Lewis Crawford came through the administrative door in the manner of a man who had heard raised voices and arrived prepared to reassert order, only to find that the order of the room had already been comprehensively restructured by someone who outranked him in every possible sense. He was 56, with close-cropped gray hair from a military background, and the careful, measured demeanor of a man who had survived 3 police chiefs and 4 political cycles by being useful to whoever was in charge and never being the loudest voice in any room. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had made over the course of a career the specific choice to maintain his position within a structure rather than challenge its worst tendencies. He was looking at the accounting of that choice now. He read the room in 5 seconds. Denton's terror. Mercer pressed against the wall, looking physically ill. A man in sweatpants, standing in the center of the booking area, radiating contained authority, with purple bruise marks visible on both wrists. Crawford's eyes moved to the badge wallet, visible in Marcus's jacket pocket, the gold catching the fluorescent light at the angle the pocket created, and he did not need to read the credential to understand what he was looking at. He crossed to Marcus and introduced himself with a tone that had already abandoned any pretense of administrative superiority. "Captain Lewis Crawford," he said carefully. "I assume there has been a significant failure of protocol here." "That is the understatement of the decade," Captain Marcus replied. Crawford absorbed this. "I want you to know we will address this immediately and thoroughly, and I give you my full—" "No," Captain Marcus said. "Quiet. Absolute. You will not address this internally. This is a federal civil rights violation with body camera footage, dash cam footage, a dispatch audio record, and a booking sergeant as a direct witness. I want Pruitt's and Mercer's body camera files secured to an encrypted drive immediately. I want the dash cam footage from Adam 7 pulled and preserved. I want the unedited dispatch audio from the 911 call that initiated this, including the caller's full stated description, logged on and treated as evidence. None of that evidence leaves this building through unauthorized channels. Do we understand each other? Crawford held his gaze for one measured second. The instinct to protect his department was real and present, and so was the reality of what he was looking at. A federal agent with documented wrist injuries, continuous camera footage, and the full institutional resources of the FBI available to him with a single phone call. Crawford turned to Denton. Secure the body cam footage from Mercer and Pruitt. Lock the files in the digital evidence vault. Encryption key directly to me. Yes, Captain. Denton moved immediately. Crawford turned his gaze to Mercer. It was not the look of a superior to a subordinate. It was the look of a man examining something that had just become an irreversible liability. Badge and service weapon. Right now. What happened to Trent Mercer in the next 90 seconds was the particular collapse that occurs when everything a person has built their identity around is removed faster than their psychology can process the removal, Cappy said. The word came out in a register wholly new, not the clipped authoritative bark of 17 years, but the thin cracking voice of a person who has just realized the room has no floor. Cap, please. The call came in. I was responding. I followed protocol. You know me. 17 years. You know me. Stop talking, Trent. Crawford said it without heat, without cruelty, with the absolute clarity of someone who has already moved past the point where softening it would change anything. I have a mortgage, Mercer said. The words came in a rush, as if producing his personal inventory of things at risk could make them visible enough to constitute a defense. I have 18 months to my pension. My daughter is at state on a plan that caps 17 years. You can't, badge and weapon, Crawford said. His voice did not change. Mercer looked at him. Then he looked at Marcus, who was watching the proceeding with the focused observational calm of a man completing a professional task. There was no gloating in Marcus's expression, no theatrical satisfaction, just the alert, complete attention of someone for whom this moment was evidence and not entertainment. With hands that were shaking visibly, the violent, involuntary shaking of a man whose nervous system has received a shock it cannot metabolize, Trent Mercer unclipped his duty belt. The loaded holster hit the booking desk with a heavy, definitive thud, the sound of equipment carried for 17 years being set down for the last time. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest. He held it in his palm for one moment and then placed it beside the gun. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a federal civil rights investigation, Crawford said. He pointed to the holding cell, the same cell Mercer had intended to put Marcus in. Get in the cell, Trent. Mercer looked up. The remnant of his old self surfaced briefly. What cap you cannot not in my own. You are a suspect in a federal felony investigation, Marcus said. The cell is where suspects go. With the slow dragging steps of a man moving towards something he cannot stop, Trent. Mercer walked across the booking room to the holding cell. The door was heavy steel. The sound it made when Crawford swung it shut was not loud, but it was completely and irrevocably final. 3 black unmarked federal Suburbans pulled into the Whitfield County Precinct parking lot with the quiet, purposeful precision of vehicles whose drivers had been briefed on exactly where they were going and why. They arrived in formation, nosed between the local cruisers, and sat for approximately 10 seconds before the doors opened in unison. 5 agents emerged in tactical khakis and dark windbreakers, with FBI in bold yellow letters across the backs. They moved through the precinct's front entrance without stopping, bypassed the security gate, and came through the booking area door in a tight professional formation that transformed the atmosphere of the room the instant they entered it, the way a change in atmospheric pressure transforms a space before the weather arrives. Leading them was Supervisory Special Agent Denise Okafor, Marcus's second-in-command. Okafor was 43 with the particular quality of stillness that comes from years of doing work that required entering volatile rooms without contributing to the volatility. She was brilliant controlled and fiercely protective of her team. When she came through the door and saw Marcus standing by the booking desk in his sweatpants, without handcuffs, with the bruise marks on his wrists still visible from across the room, her expression did not change. Not one visible degree. But something in the set of her jaw tightened in a way that to anyone who had worked alongside her for more than 6 months read as fury that had been placed into a very small, very secure container and locked there deliberately. She came to stand beside Marcus. Her eyes swept the room, the pale and sweating Denton, the closed holding cell, the young rookie Pruitt standing in the break room doorway, looking like a man attending the proceedings of his own future. Boss Okafor said, her voice a low, controlled instrument. "Tell me we are securing this scene." "We are securing the scene," Marcus confirmed. Full custody of the digital evidence body cams from both officers, dash cam from Adam 7, the dispatch audio from this morning. Chain of custody documentation on everything. Done. Okafor turned and gestured to 2 agents who moved immediately to the IT terminal. Denton stepped back without being asked. The rookie, Marcus said, tilting his head toward Pruitt. "He writes his statement now, truthfully and completely. Everything from the moment the call came in to the moment we arrived in this building. Full account, nothing omitted. If his statement is complete and honest, his exposure is limited. If he omits anything, and we find it in the footage." Marcus paused with the quiet certainty of a man who has pulled hard drives from more crime scenes than Pruitt has. "Years of service, we will find everything." Then obstruction charges become part of his conversation. Crawford nodded and went to the break room to deliver this to Pruitt directly. Pruitt listened with his head bowed. Then he picked up a pen and a legal pad and began to write without hesitation. He wrote for 20 minutes. When he was finished, he handed the pad to Crawford, who read it and brought it directly to Okafor. Okafor read it once. "Complete," she said. Marcus nodded. He had not doubted it. The truth, when a person was finally ready to commit to it, was never difficult to write down. It was only difficult to choose. At 321 Elmwood Circle, the morning had continued without apparent incident. Patricia Holden had made herself a second cup of coffee after the police cruiser pulled away with the man from the porch. She had done this with the comfortable efficiency of a woman moving through a familiar routine, and the comfort of the routine had settled around her like a garment that fit well. She had done the right thing. The process had worked. The suspicious man had been removed. The neighborhood had been restored to its natural state. She repotted a fern that had been sitting in its plastic nursery container 2 weeks longer than she'd intended. She answered an HOA email. She felt in the particular way that people feel after convincing themselves they have performed a useful civic function, the warmth of self-satisfaction. She was deeply engrossed in pressing potting soil around the fern's base when the police cruiser she did not recognize turned onto Elmwood Circle. She looked up. Different vehicle, different officers. She set down her trowel and moved toward the door, her face already arranging itself into an expression of neighborly gratitude. Perhaps they were coming to update her. Perhaps they wanted to express appreciation for a concerned citizen's timely report. She pulled the door open just as 2 uniformed officers stepped onto her porch. The expression she had prepared held for approximately 2 seconds before she registered that neither officer was smiling. The lead officer was a woman named Sandra Beck. She was in her 40s with the professional composure of someone who had been doing this particular category of work long enough to do it without editorial commentary. She had listened to the dispatch audio of Patricia's call in the cruiser on the way over. She knew what she was looking at. "Good morning, ma'am," Beck said. "Are you Patricia Holden?" "Yes," Patricia replied. Her smile was fading at the edges, uncertain where to anchor itself without encouragement. "Is there a problem? Did something happen with—" "Mrs. Holden," Beck said, "the man you called the police on this morning is the legal owner of the property at 318 Elmwood Circle. He purchased it 14 weeks ago and moved in 3 days ago." A pause, clean and deliberate. "He is also the special agent in charge of the FBI's Organized Crime Division." The sentence landed between them, and Patricia stood inside the impact of it without speaking for a full 5 seconds. The color in her face went through a sequence from its normal complexion through a pale shock and then into the mottled, disorganized flush of a person whose system was trying to manage several contradictory biological responses simultaneously. I'm sorry what she started. No, that cannot be right. He was wearing sweatpants. He looked like a... She stopped. The word she had been about to say stopped itself somewhere in the architecture of her sentence, the way that certain words know at the last possible moment that they should not be spoken aloud. Beck did not look away. He looked like a thug, she said, completing the sentence in the neutral tone of someone reading a statement into a record. That was the characterization in your call, Mrs. Holden. You also told dispatch he clearly does not belong here. He was standing on his own porch drinking coffee from his own kitchen in front of moving boxes that had been visible through his front window for 3 days. I was reporting suspicious behavior, Patricia said. Her voice had climbed into the register of a person constructing a defense in real time. I have the right to call the police. If I see something, you have the right to report criminal behavior, Beck said. You do not have the legal right to use the 911 emergency system to direct armed police officers at a neighbor because of how he looks while standing on his own property. As a result of your call this morning, officers engaged in the unlawful arrest of a federal agent. Because your report contained materially false statements, specifically that the property was vacant and that the homeowner was not present, you are being issued a criminal citation for filing a false police report and misusing the emergency dispatch system. Beck wrote. The pen moved across the yellow citation pad with clean, unhurried purpose. Patricia watched it with the fixed, horrified attention of a person watching something happen to them that they cannot stop. A criminal citation, Patricia said. You are giving me I know the mayor. I have served on the HOA board for 9 years. I have lived in this neighborhood for 14. Beck ripped the carbon copy from the pad and held it out. You can sign the citation and appear in court next month to pay the fine, she said. Or you can decline to sign it, and I will place you under arrest and take you to holding. Given the additional federal dimensions of this situation, I strongly suggest you sign the paper. Patricia looked at Beck's hand. She looked at her partner, who was regarding the middle distance, with the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned to be mentally elsewhere when certain situations resolved themselves. She looked across the street at 318 at the empty porch where the man had been standing. And in that moment, something moved behind Patricia Holden's eyes. Not guilt in its full form, not yet. Not the genuine and complete recognition that would arrive later and slowly the way these things do. But the first hairline crack of it. The beginning of the understanding that she had looked at a man standing quietly on his own porch, holding coffee he had made in his own kitchen, thinking nothing more than the ordinary thoughts of a new homeowner, and she had decided he was a criminal without a single piece of evidence to support it, and that the only material her decision had been made of was the color of his skin and the address of the street. She took the pen. Her hand was shaking. She signed her name. The signature was small and quiet and looked nothing like her usual confident script. Beck took the pen back, folded the citation, and stepped off the porch. Have a good morning, Mrs. Holden, she said. Patricia stood at the open door long after the cruiser had turned the corner and disappeared the signed citation in her hand, looking at the empty porch across the street. The story broke on a local news website by Tuesday morning. A reporter covering Whitfield County Municipal Affairs had been monitoring police dispatch logs and noticed the unusual intersection of a routine suspicious person call and a subsequent federal evidence lock at the precinct on the same Saturday morning at the same address. He made 2 phone calls and wrote a factual account. A Cedar Brook Heights woman had called the police on her new neighbor, reporting him as a suspicious person who did not belong on the property. The neighbor was the special agent in charge of the FBI's Organized Crime Division. The responding officer had arrested the federal agent and was now under federal investigation. The story did not name Patricia Holden. It did not need to. Within 8 hours, 3 of her neighbors had made the connection. By Thursday, the connection had been made publicly in the local community forum, accompanied by a screenshot of the dispatch audio that an anonymous source had provided. The audio was 11 minutes long. Patricia's voice, the manufactured urgency, The phrasing, the specific characterization of a man who was clearly where he didn't belong, was clear and consistent, and completely at odds with the version of events she had been quietly presenting to the neighbors she still felt comfortable calling. The HOA board convened an emergency session the following Monday. Patricia arrived prepared to defend herself. The board voted 7-0 to remove her from the presidency within 7 minutes. She drove home without the lanyard she had worn nearly every day for 9 years and sat in her kitchen for a long time. The civil rights organization supporting Marcus's case released the unedited dispatch audio to 3 local television stations simultaneously on a Thursday evening. Patricia's voice, "He clearly does not belong here," played on the local news at 6 and again at 10. She watched it on her own television. By mid-November, 321 Elmwood Circle was listed for sale. Patricia moved before sunrise on a weekday morning, not dramatically, but with the quiet, methodical efficiency of a woman who had decided the only available move was forward into a smaller town, a less expensive house, a place where nobody knew her name yet. What she left behind in the dispatch audio, in the community memory, in the formal record of the citation, and the federal investigation to which it was attached stayed after she was gone. It was the shape her action had made in the world, and shapes like that do not leave, because the person who made them does. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia accepted Marcus's formal complaint and opened a civil rights investigation within 48 hours of the incident. The acceptance was not slow or reluctant. A sitting special agent in charge, with documented wrist injuries, continuous body camera footage of the arrest, a booking sergeant as a direct witness, and the full institutional resources of the FBI's Region 6 office, was not a complainant that a federal prosecutor needed to deliberate about. The investigation was assigned to Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Voss, a 47-year-old career federal prosecutor who specialized in civil rights violations, and who approached Mercer's personnel file with the focused attention of a person who suspects she is looking at the visible top of a much larger structure. What she found in the file confirmed the suspicion. 11 citizen complaints over 17 years, 8 from black residents, all involving stops in Cedar Brook Heights or the 2 adjacent affluent neighborhoods. The complaints were detailed and consistent in their pattern stops, without cause, demands for identification, without legal basis language that complainants described in varying ways, but that the investigators reading the accounts side by side recognized as variations on a single theme. All 11 had been administratively dismissed under the previous department chief, unsubstantiated. The word appeared in every dismissal record with the evenness of a stamp, the stamp of a system that had processed the complaints as paperwork rather than examining them as documentation of a pattern. The body camera footage from Pruitt's camera removed any remaining room for interpretation. It was clear, continuous, and fully audible. It showed Marcus's hands on the railing. It showed his verbal compliance. It showed Mercer's escalating commands, the holster unsnap, and the physical arrest of a man offering zero resistance. It showed the deliberate over-tightening of the cuffs. It captured in Pruitt's audio during the ride to the precinct Mercer's commentary about Marcus, the dismissal of his claim to the house, the assertion that men who looked like Marcus didn't live in neighborhoods like Cedar Brook Heights. Voss broadened the investigation within the first week to examine the department's complaint dismissal practices. 3 other officers came under scrutiny for patterns similar to Mercer's. The investigation was no longer solely about one unlawful arrest on one Saturday morning. It had become an examination of the mechanism that had made that arrest possible and had protected the man who made it for 17 years. Then 3 weeks into the investigation, Voss showed Marcus a document that changed the shape of everything that had come before it. It was a liaison report dated 9 weeks before the Saturday morning on Elmwood Circle, generated by Marcus's own division as part of a routine civil rights enforcement survey of Whitfield County. In it, under the heading of Officers with Documented Patterns of Racially Disparate Stop Activity, was a name. Dale Mercer, badge number 4031. Marcus had read that report. He had read it at his desk in the Region 6 field office, noted the name, and filed it in the mental ledger he kept of situations that needed watching. He had not yet opened a formal file. He had not yet had cause. 9 weeks later, cause had come to him on his own porch. Voss looked at the document in her hands, and then at the man sitting across the table from her. "You knew it was Mercer," she said. "It was not quite a question." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I knew who he was," he said. "I didn't know it was going to be that morning." He paused. "I let him commit, because the file needed to be complete." Voss looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the report. Then she looked at the body camera footage, still she had pinned to the review board, Marcus's hands on the railing, the holster, unsnapped, the deliberate over-tightening of the cuffs, and she understood something she had not understood before. The decision not to show the badge had not been only an act of principle. It had been an act of prosecution. The man standing on the porch with his coffee on a Saturday morning had not been caught off guard by what happened to him. He had understood it. He had absorbed it deliberately, strategically, and with the full professional competence of a person who knew exactly what the evidence would need to show, and had made sure it showed all of it. Mercer had thought he was teaching Marcus Webb a lesson about who owned the streets of Cedar Brook Heights. Marcus had been finishing a file on him. Captain Crawford cooperated fully, turning over all records, making a public statement, acknowledging the department's failures, giving on-record interviews that Voss described as some of the most useful testimony she collected during the entire process. He was trying to save what could still be saved. Marcus understood this and did not hold it against him. Officer Caleb Pruitt testified before the federal grand jury on a Thursday morning in late November. He arrived in a gray suit he had clearly bought specifically for the occasion. It fit slightly wrong at the shoulders in the way of a suit purchased under time pressure, and he carried a legal pad on which he had written notes to himself about how to be accurate and not to soften things that needed to be said clearly. He took the oath, and he told the truth. He told it chronologically, without embellishment, without the protective omission that police testimony sometimes employs to serve its author. He described Mercer's language in the cruiser before they reached Elmwood Circle. He described the way Mercer had looked at Marcus before getting out of the car, the way his face had already settled into a conclusion before contact was made. He described the holster unsnap. He described the deliberate over-tightening of the cuffs, noting that he had seen it happen and registered it as wrong and had said nothing, and he delivered this into the grand jury record in the same even honest tone with which he delivered everything else as a fact about himself that he had no interest in minimizing. He was not charged. His badge was reinstated without conditions. He was assigned to mandatory de-escalation and constitutional rights training, a 40-hour course that he completed voluntarily without complaint 2 weeks before the deadline. In his final written statement to investigators at the end of a document that ran to 14 pages, Caleb Pruitt wrote a single sentence that the federal judgment would later quote directly. "I knew it was wrong before we reached the porch, and I said nothing, and I will carry that for the rest of my career." He requested a transfer to Montgomery County within the month of his reinstatement. He was assigned to a precinct there, and within his first year was selected for the Field Training Officer program, where he specialized in civil rights compliance. He did not discuss the Elmwood Circle arrest publicly. He did not seek recognition for doing the right thing. He simply went to work and tried to be the officer he had believed he was going to be when he was 12 years old. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and incremental and unglamorous. It was also, in Marcus's assessment, the kind of change that actually moved something. The Whitfield County Police Benevolent Association assigned Mercer a defense attorney within 4 days of the incident and issued a preliminary statement signaling it would support its member through the investigative process. The statement used words like due process and the challenging realities of modern law enforcement and struck the customary balance of not prejudging the outcome while indicating solidarity with the officer under investigation. The union's defense attorney received the evidence package from Federal Disclosure on a Thursday evening. He worked through the weekend. On Monday morning, he called the union's general counsel and said there was no workable defense. He was specific. The body camera footage was not ambiguous. The dispatch audio of Patricia's call combined with the arrival footage showing Marcus's hands on the railing and no evidence of any suspicious behavior dismantled the predicate for the stop entirely. Pruitt's testimony covered the in-cruiser commentary. The booking room interaction, which Pruitt's body camera had continued to capture, documented the wrist marks, the handcuff removal, and Marcus's verbal account delivered directly to Denton.
There is no gap in this evidence, the attorney told the general counsel. There is no angle. The footage is continuous, the testimony is corroborated, and the complainant is a special agent in charge with the full resources of the Bureau behind him. There is no defense that has a reasonable probability of success.
The PBA released a statement on Wednesday, 2 sentences long. It stated that the organization had reviewed the available information and determined that Officer Dale Mercer's conduct fell outside the scope of behavior the association could defend. It stated that the organization would not be providing legal representation. Mercer received no calls from the union after the statement was released. No visits, no offers of any kind. The institutional solidarity that had absorbed 11 complaints across 17 years and returned them to him untouched had in the space of 1 week dissolved completely. His private attorney advised him within 2 weeks that the evidence was conclusive and that a negotiated plea was the only path avoiding a jury trial he would lose. Mercer refused initially. The ember of the belief that someone would intervene was still burning, however faintly. It took 6 weeks for that ember to go out entirely. When it did, he instructed his attorney to negotiate. 8 months and 11 days after the Saturday morning on Elmwood Circle, United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia convened for the sentencing hearing of the United States versus Dale Allen Mercer. The courtroom was full. Community members occupied every available seat in the gallery. Residents of Cedarbrook Heights and the surrounding neighborhoods, people who had filed complaints with the Whitfield County Police Department over the years and been told those complaints were unsubstantiated civil rights advocates who had tracked the case from its first day, journalists from the local and regional press. In the 4th row, almost directly behind the prosecution table, sat 3 full rows of federal agents who had taken personal leave to be present. They sat in their own clothes with the specific attentive stillness of people who understood precisely what they were witnessing. Marcus sat in the 2nd row on the left side of the gallery. He wore a charcoal suit, not his best, but the one he had bought the year he was promoted to SAIC, which had a quality of occasion about it that felt right for this morning. His son Darius sat beside him. Darius was 24 years old. He had his father's bearing and his mother's eyes, and he had spent 8 months processing the specific experience of being the child of a man that the institution he served had failed in a way that was supposed to be impossible. He had done this processing partly in conversation with his father and partly in the extended quiet of a young person working something out that he could not yet fully articulate. He sat beside Marcus in the courtroom with his jaw set and his eyes tracking every detail of the room. This was the first time Darius had seen his father in this context, not as the man who had missed birthdays for field assignments, as the man the system had failed, as the man who had stood on his own porch and absorbed what was done to him with a composure that had cost something real, and who had made that composure into an instrument of something larger than himself. At the defense table, Dale Mercer sat in a gray suit that did not fit him well. He had lost weight in 8 months, visible weight, the kind that leaves a person's face looking slightly surprised by its own new dimensions. His posture was stooped in the specific way of a man from whom the thing that held him upright has been removed. The arrogant flush that had been a constant feature of his face on Elmwood Circle was entirely gone. What had replaced it was the hollowed, pale look of someone who had spent 8 months watching everything he had built his life around dissolve. Judge Florence Archer presided. She was in her early 60s, a black woman with natural silver hair, and 22 years on the federal bench. Her reputation was specific and consistent, zero tolerance for the abuse of public authority, a deep familiarity with civil rights statutes and their historical context, and the kind of patience in a courtroom that comes not from temperamental placidity, but from a complete absence of any desire to perform. She did not perform. She simply presided, and the distinction was felt by everyone in the room within the first 5 minutes. She began the pre-sentencing remarks by reading into the record, one by one, the 11 citizen complaints from Mercer's personnel file. She read them in chronological order. She read the name of each complainant, the date of each incident, the nature of each complaint, and the administrative disposition unsubstantiated of each one. She read them without commentary, but the cumulative effect of the reading was its own form of commentary. 11 instances, 17 years, 8 complainants who were black, 11 dismissals that had returned Mercer to the street to repeat the pattern. When she had finished, she looked up from the file and over the top of her reading glasses at Mercer. "The question this court is required to ask," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "is how many people who filed complaints before Marcus Webb did not have a gold shield to make it stop? How many of them sat in a booking room in handcuffs with no institutional weight behind them? How many of them went home and filed paperwork that was received, processed, logged, and quietly buried?" She set the file down. That question does not have a comfortable answer, and it will not be answered in this courtroom today. But it will be answered in the department review that has been ordered in the 3 additional investigations currently open, and in the Civil Rights Fund this court will order established as part of today's sentence. "Dale Allen Mercer," Judge Archer said, and the words carried the weight of 22 years shall on the bench. "Please rise." Mercer rose. His legs required visible effort, a slight unsteadiness that his attorney's hand on his elbow did not entirely stabilize. "You were given by the people of this county and this country a badge, a service weapon, and the legal authority to enforce the laws that protect everyone living under them. You were trusted with that authority every day for 17 years. The record shows that you used it selectively, aggressively, and in ways driven not by the laws you were sworn to enforce, but by your own settled assumptions about which residents of which neighborhoods required your particular brand of attention." She paused. In the gallery, the silence was complete. "On the morning in question, you stopped a man drinking coffee on his front porch because you had decided before you got out of your vehicle that he did not belong there. You refused his statement of ownership. You refused to examine the evidence available to you, the moving boxes, the door inspection, the man's own clearly stated account of who he was. You chose to proceed on the basis of an assumption made entirely on the basis of his race. And when he declined to comply with your unlawful demands, you used force against him on his own property." Judge Archer set down her reading glasses and looked directly at Mercer. "You did not know he was a federal agent, and that Mr. Mercer is precisely the point. You assumed he was a nobody. You assumed he had no voice. You assumed you would get away with it, just as the record shows you had 11 times before." Mercer's jaw was trembling. He was looking at the defense table. "For the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, pursuant to Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Judge Archer said, I sentence you to 54 months in a federal penitentiary." She picked up her gavel. "Upon release, you are permanently barred from any position in law enforcement, security, corrections, or public office at any level. Your municipal pension accrued across 17 years of service is forfeited in full. By separate court order, a portion of that pension value will be redirected to the Whitfield County Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund to provide legal representation to low-income residents of this county who face abuses of law enforcement authority." The gavel came down. The sound it made was small and clean and entirely final. The courtroom did not erupt. It exhaled. The long communal breath of a room that had been holding something for a long time and had now been given permission to release it. Not celebration, something older and quieter. Something closer to the feeling of a correction long overdue. The marshals turned Mercer to face the exit. In the brief rotation before he cleared the bar, his eyes moved involuntarily to the gallery. The same involuntary reflex that had always directed his attention toward the thing he had most needed to establish dominance over. He found Marcus. Marcus was looking back at him, not with satisfaction, not with the particular brightness of a man watching something he had wanted to watch. He was looking at Mercer the way a man looks at the conclusion of something he began, the way you look at a closed door when you know you will not open it again. It was not unkind. It was not warm. It was complete. The look of someone who has been patient for a long time and has seen the patience resolve into something permanent. Mercer held that gaze for 2 seconds. Then the marshals moved him through the door, and the door closed behind him, and Marcus looked away. The equation that had opened on an October porch with a shattered coffee mug had balanced itself. The accounting was done.
In the gallery, Darius put his hand on his father's arm. Marcus covered it with his own, and they sat that way for a long moment, while the room around them moved journalists collecting their things, community members reaching for each other. The agents in the gallery rose, filing out with the quiet, purposeful efficiency with which they had arrived.
Marcus and Darius were among the last to stand. When they did, Marcus straightened his jacket, looked once more at the side door through which Mercer had been taken, and turned toward the main exit. Outside on the courthouse steps, Okafor and 3 agents from Region 6 were waiting. They were in their own clothes. It was a Saturday, and they had come on their own time from their own lives. Okafor had her hands in the pockets of a dark wool coat. She looked at Marcus when he came through the door, and what passed between them required nothing in the way of language. A local reporter approached. She had a recorder in her hand, and the specific combination of professional assertiveness and personal uncertainty of someone not entirely sure how to approach this particular moment. "Agent Webb," she said. "Do you have a statement?" Marcus stopped. He looked at the courthouse. He looked at the street beyond the steps where the ordinary Saturday morning traffic of Whitfield County is in its ordinary patterns. He thought for a genuine moment before he spoke. "The case was never about me," he said. "I had a gold shield in my pocket. I had 26 years of federal service and the resources of the Bureau behind me. Those things made a difference to how this morning ended. The 17 people who filed complaints before me didn't have any of that. They had their word and the correctness of what they were reporting, and the system classified it as unsubstantiated and returned them to their lives. What happens to them now, whether this case changes anything for them, is the only question worth spending time on." The reporter had a follow-up. "Do you feel like justice was served today?" Marcus looked at the courthouse, then at Darius, standing one step behind him, then at the city beyond the steps. "Today, yes," he said, and he went to the car. 7 months after the sentencing, on a warm Saturday morning in late April, Marcus Webb came through the front door of 318 Elmwood Circle, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. The house was different from October. The moving boxes were long gone since November, when Darius had arrived for a long weekend, and the 2 of them had unpacked the last of them with the comfortable, slightly competitive efficiency of a father and son working in a shared space. The kitchen was fully organized. The spare bedroom was a proper guest room. The 3rd bedroom had become an office with good light and a view of the backyard where sometime in March, a cardinal had begun visiting the window ledge with the regularity of an appointment. The porch had been refinished. Marcus had done it himself over 2 weekends in early March when the Georgia weather cooperated, and he had found in the physical work of sanding and sealing and attending to the corners and the trim something that was its own form of reclaiming. He had refinished the railing, specifically the same railing Mercer had pressed him against, the same railing from which the coffee mug had fallen and shattered. He had sanded it down to bare wood and sealed it with mahogany oil until it gleamed. And he had done this not as a gesture, but as a practical task that had the additional quality of being the right thing to do with his hands on an afternoon when he needed to do something with his hands. There was wicker furniture now, 2 chairs and a small table positioned to take advantage of the morning light, and a porch swing that Darius had helped him hang in February during a visit that was officially about the swing, and really about the 2 of them sitting on it afterward in the cold evening air, talking about things they had not previously found the words for. The hanging fern on the hook beside the front door had been Darius's housewarming gift, delivered 5 months late, with the sheepish admission that he had bought it in November and kept forgetting to bring it. It was thriving. Marcus took this as a good sign about something he did not need to name specifically. Darius was on the porch swing when Marcus came out. He had his feet up on the rail, a habit Marcus had been failing to correct for 24 years, and in his hand was a letter on architecture firm letterhead, a job offer. He had been moving toward this offer for 2 months, reporting each round of interviews to Marcus with the specificity of a person who wanted his father's engagement with the details and who received it each time with genuine interest rather than the performed variety. Marcus handed him the slug. Darius took it without looking up from the letter which he had already read at least 4 times, but apparently needed to read again. Marcus leaned against the railing, both hands wrapped around his coffee, the same hands that had worn Mercer's handcuffs. He held the mug the way he had held it on this same railing 7 months ago, and he let the morning organize itself around him. The street was quiet in the April way, warmer than October, the oaks in full new leaf, now the light coming through them in the shifting pattern that morning light makes when it moves through growth that hasn't hardened yet into summer. A dog walker passed a man in a blue jacket with a golden retriever on a long lead who raised a hand in the brief, uncomplicated acknowledgement of a neighbor recognized. Marcus raised his coffee back.
3 houses down the same quiet lawnmower he had heard on the October morning. The same sound, steady and ordinary, and belonging entirely to a morning that had nothing more than ordinary things happening in it. Darius looked up from the letter. "They want an answer by May 15th, he said. "What does your answer feel like?" Marcus asked.
Darius considered this with the expression of a young man who has learned from a father who never said anything. He didn't mean that the question was real and deserved a real answer. "It feels like, yes," he said. "It feels like I've been building toward exactly this, and I'd be an idiot to say otherwise." "Then say yes," Marcus said. Darius looked at him for a moment. "Were you this decisive at 24? I was worse," Marcus said. "I was certain I was decisive, which is different." Darius laughed. It was genuine and uncomplicated, and landed in the April morning with the ease of a sound that belonged there. He reached for his phone to compose the reply. Marcus looked out at the street. He was thinking about nothing in particular, and about everything at once in the way that certain mornings allow. He was thinking about the cardinal at the office window, and the refinished railing, and the coffee, which was still perfect. He was thinking about the wrist ache, the phantom sensation that had lived in both wrists on cold mornings since October, the body's record of what the steel had done, and noting with something that was not quite surprise, but adjacent to it, that this morning it was not there. It had been fading for weeks. This morning, standing at this railing in the April sun, it was gone. He noticed its absence the way you notice silence after a long noise first, with the awareness that something has changed then, with the understanding of what the change means, and then with the kind of stillness that follows when you realize the thing you had been braced against is no longer coming. He thought about Mercer, not with anger. The anger had had its season, and had been useful, and had since been converted into something more durable. He thought about the liaison report and the 9 weeks between reading Mercer's name and the October morning. He thought about the decision he had made on the porch, the decision to absorb what was coming, rather than stop it, to let the violation complete itself on camera, so the consequences would be inescapable and permanent. He thought about whether a man was permitted to ask himself, in retrospect, whether it had been worth it. He had decided in the months since that it had. Not because the outcome was good, though it was not because Mercer was sentenced, though he was, but because the decision had been made in full possession of his own values and his own clarity. He had not been passive. He had not been a victim. He had been strategic. He had absorbed what he had absorbed as an act of deliberate professional agency, and the difference between what is done to you and what you choose to let happen for reasons that are your own was a distance that statistics could not measure, but that a man could feel in his body, could feel in the absence of an ache on a warm morning in April, standing on a porch he had refinished with his own hands. The sound of a cruiser came from the east end of Elmwood Circle. Marcus tracked it without urgency, the shift of attention that was simply what his body did when a law enforcement vehicle appeared, a reflex built across decades that would probably never fully stand down. The cruiser was a Whitfield County vehicle, new livery. The department had adopted a cleaner design as part of Crawford's comprehensive protocol reorganization, a deliberate visual break from the previous administration's aesthetic. It was moving at the pace of a neighborhood patrol, unhurried engine at the idle speed of a vehicle going nowhere in particular except through a street on a routine circuit. It turned onto Elmwood Circle from the eastern corner and moved down the block. Behind him, Darius had gone quiet. He had seen the cruiser too, and for a moment, the October morning existed briefly inside this April one, a brief, involuntary superimposition of then over now. The same street, the same corner, the same direction of approach. The cruiser reached 318. The officer in the driver's seat was young late 20s, with the sharp, fresh uniform quality of someone who had not yet accumulated the particular wear that certain kinds of work put on people over time. Marcus did not recognize the face. He was not one of Mercer's colleagues. He was simply a young officer doing a Saturday morning patrol on a quiet street. As the cruiser came alongside the driveway, the officer looked over. He saw Marcus on the porch, a tall man in athletic shorts and a plain t-shirt leaning against a freshly refinished mahogany railing holding a coffee mug. He saw a homeowner on a Saturday morning. He saw exactly what was there to see. The officer raised his hand through the open window. A clean, easy wave, the same gesture as the dog walker, the same gesture as the jogger on the October morning. The ordinary, unremarkable acknowledgement that passes between people who share a street and nothing more is required. Marcus raised his mug. The cruiser moved on. It turned the corner at the western end of Elmwood Circle and was gone, its engine sound fading into the broader sound of the April morning, the mower, the birds, the light wind moving through the new oak leaves until it was indistinguishable from everything else, and then not there at all. Marcus stayed at the railing for a long moment after it was gone. Stayed the way a person stays when something has happened that they want to hold briefly before setting it down. Behind him, Darius said quietly, "You okay, Dad?" Marcus looked at the empty corner, at the street settling back into its Saturday rhythm, at the April light coming through the oaks in its particular shifting pattern. He took a long, slow sip of coffee. "Yeah," he said, and he meant it the way that word almost never gets to mean without qualification. Without the unexamined weight of everything still unresolved, without the performance of a man who is fine because the alternative is too complicated to explain. He meant it the way a man means it when it is true. He turned back to the porch. Darius was looking at him with an expression that was not a question, but held the shape of the particular expression of a young person watching a parent arrive somewhere and wanting to be sure of it. Marcus looked at his son, then at the street, then at the mug in his hands and the steam still rising from it in the warm morning air. The morning holds. Marcus does not go back inside right away. He stays on the porch, coffee in his hands, watching the street settle into its Saturday rhythm, the dog walker completing his loop, the mower finishing one pass and beginning another. A neighbor 2 doors down, deadheading the spring flowers along her front walk with some small precise snips. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things a man is supposed to be able to watch from his own porch without it costing him anything, and the kind of things Marcus Webb is going to watch from this porch for as many mornings as this porch has left to give him. The October morning cost him something real. He does not pretend otherwise, and he does not minimize it, and he does not need anyone to tell him it was worth it. He already knows. He knew it on the porch when he felt the steel close around his wrists and chose with his full intelligence and his full will to let it happen. That choice was his, and what it built belongs to him. And the 17 people whose complaints were buried for 17 years have something different available to them now because of it. That is enough. That is in fact more than enough. Darius asks his father quietly whether it ever stops feeling fragile. Marcus takes a long time with the answer, not because he doesn't have one, but because the question deserves the full weight of what he has learned. He says it stops feeling fragile when you stop waiting for permission to occupy the space you've earned. When you understand that the people who need you to be something smaller than you are do not have the authority to make that so. They can inconvenience you. They can cost you something. They cannot determine what you are, and that distinction between what can be done to you and what can be taken from you is the whole distance between surviving something and being shaped by it. He says it doesn't anymore. The street is quiet. The coffee is good. The porch is his. If this story reached something in you, if it made you ask what you would have done on that porch, whether you would have shown the badge or let the truth play out the long way, we'd be glad to hear it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. We'll keep telling them.